Okay. So first of all, welcome back to Nexus, Dr. Horowitz. I want to start.
I'm surprised you let me come back.
We're always happy to have you back. So I want to start off with an introduction, or perhaps a reintroduction for the folks who were here last year. You lead the Office of Emerging Capabilities Policy at the U.S. Department of Defense. What is Emerging Capabilities Policy?
The Emerging Capabilities Policy Office was stood up in last December, or I guess in December 2021 by Undersecretary Call, based on an understanding that OSD policy needed to be a better partner for the department when it came to accelerating innovation adoption and thinking about norms of responsible behavior concerning the use of emerging technologies and emerging capabilities. We have 4 central missions. The first is that core task of accelerating emerging capability adoption and ensuring that they're reflected effectively in the National Defense Strategy, the Defense Planning Guidance, and our budget. The second involves norms of responsible behavior, looking at capabilities where the department has decided that some additional level of review may be necessary, given questions about the capabilities and the need to ensure that they can be employed in a safe and responsible manner. The third involves questions surrounding strategic stability and how we can ensure that emerging capabilities are deployed in ways that enhance rather than detract from strategic stability. And the fourth is working with allies and partners on all of these issues, but especially emerging capability adoption.
Great, thank you. So your office has been really active the past year on AI and autonomy policy for the department. Your office updated the DoD Directive 3909, which is the department's policy on autonomous weapon systems. It was a first update in 10 years. You also led the AI political declaration with the State Department, as well as a lot of the work with the UN through the GGE laws process. How do all of these activities fit together, and what's the department's vision and goals for these?
I think the department's vision for AI and autonomy is right there in the National Defense Strategy, and that it's to enhance the capability of the joint force to deter aggression and ensure a more free and open world. And the department thinks of AI and autonomy as important technologies and capabilities that can enable us to do that. If you look at the critical technology areas that Research and Engineering Undersecretary Ms. Hsu announced a little over a year ago, you see trusted AI and autonomy right there in the headlines. And so the department views these capabilities as absolutely vital to our future capabilities. And in terms of what the office has done over the last year, you pointed out about several things. I want to focus on 2. The first is the update to DoD Directive 3000.09, autonomy in weapon systems. It's remains the world's most extensive policy on the use of autonomy in weapon systems, covering both semi-autonomous and autonomous weapon systems. We updated the directive after a decade, in part for a really boring reason, and in part for, well, let me start with the boring reason. The DoD, which will not surprise anybody, has a directive on directives. And the directives on directives says, in a footnote, that every 10 years, a directive needs to either be canceled, reissued, or updated. And we weren't going to cancel the directive on autonomous weapon systems. After a decade, it certainly seemed like a refresh made sense. So thus we updated it. But we also thought that made sense, given advances in technology, changes in the department, changes in the security environment. And so we did a refresh of the directive that we rolled out during the winter, and we think is, in some ways, a minor repair of the original directive. It clearly incorporates DoD's ethical AI principles in the responsible AI strategy and implementation pathway. It clarifies a bunch of issues surrounding the senior review process for autonomous weapon systems, what systems are exempted or not exempted, et cetera. It's good governance in some ways more than anything else. And we're really proud to get that out, and we think that it remains a really strong statement that not only can enable the development of these capabilities when the department decides they're necessary, but also sends a really strong signal about American support for responsible and safe development and use of a semi-autonomous and autonomous capabilities. And that connects to the second piece that you mentioned, the AI political declaration. At The Hague in February, the United States announced a political declaration on the responsible military use of AI and autonomy. In some ways, it's anchored in a lot of existing Department of Defense policy. It's anchored in DoD Directive 3000.09, are the ethical AI principles, the responsible AI strategy and implementation pathway, and the piece in the nuclear posture review that ensures human involvement over critical decisions involving nuclear weapons. And we turn that into a strong normative statement supporting responsible behavior and promoting the need for countries to develop and publish their own policies, to commit to standards for testing and evaluation, lots of things that in this space we would think of generally as responsible behavior that the Department of Defense has already committed to, that many of our allies and partners are committed to. And in our hope is that this can be the basis for building international cooperation on AI and autonomy more broadly in the military realm.
So I think to tie those together, I actually want to ask you about some of the specific wording. I remember when I was in the department, the words appropriate levels of human judgment were very important. We pushed back a lot on things like human in the loop or human control. Those words in the directive were also repeated in the political declaration. Can you talk about why those specific words are so important to the department?
Absolutely. The department views the commitment to appropriate levels of human judgment in the use of force for something like an autonomous weapon system as attempting to ensure that the use of force is no different, whether there's no autonomy, whether it's a semi-autonomous weapon system, whether it's an autonomous weapon system. The U.S. law and practice, a Department of Defense policy, international humanitarian law mean the department is going to view what responsible behavior looks like in the same way. So the language of human control, I think, is sometimes raised questions for the department because it might imply a degree of micromanagement in some ways over the details of a specific use of force that's inconsistent with other commitments that the United States and many other countries have made. And so we prefer appropriate levels of human judgment because we view our commitment to both US law and international humanitarian law as ironclad and applying regardless of the type of weapon system that we're talking about. And I think that that's really important in this context. And similarly, when it comes to the question of a human, sort of in the loop, on the loop, out of the loop, et cetera, regardless of where the human is in the loop, the directive, DoD Directive 3000.09 requires an appropriate level of human judgment over the use of force, because that's what our own policy requires. That's what the law of war requires. And so thus that is our policy.
Thank you. So we've made a lot of progress on the policy front on autonomous weapon systems. In your opinion, where do you think the department is on actually developing and fielding one? Do you think we'll expect to see a senior review process anytime soon?
So one of the things that the revision to the directive did was create an autonomous weapon system working group, which is, for anybody that's been in the department, is a bureaucratic body designed to field questions about autonomous weapon systems and that people can come to if they have questions about sort of systems that they're developing. And because there are questions that come up all the time about particular systems, about particular sort of issues, but I'm not in a position to comment on any particular weapon system review process, et cetera.
Do you think there's anything that's holding back the department on actually developing and fielding an autonomous weapon system?
I think that the original directive put us in a really interesting place. And to be clear, the original directive, you now look back and you might view some pieces of language as maybe not the way we would describe these issues at the time, or not the way that we describe these issues now, was transformative and really forward-leaning compared to the way where the rest of the world was, and still remains both a transparent policy and the world's most extensive policy on autonomous weapon systems. And I don't think there's anything holding back the department in particular, because the directive very clearly lays out the requirements for the development and fielding of an autonomous weapon system. And I just want to be clear about this, which is that what DoD Directive 3000.09 says is that for autonomous weapon systems, unless they are specifically exempted out as per the directive, have to go through a senior review process prior to their development and prior to fielding. And that review process is in addition to all of the other sort of safety reviews, weapon reviews, et cetera, that the US government would do for any weapon system. So the policy in some ways very clearly lays out what the requirements would be for the development and fielding of an autonomous weapon system, and we've been working really hard to message that. And I mean, hey, I'm here, and to message that, because when the original directive came out, if you look at press reporting over the last decade, just to be clear, this is not to blame anybody in particular, press reporting over the last decade, and frankly, quotes given by people, by experts over the last decade, and like maybe even me, they sometimes describe the directive as prohibiting autonomous weapon systems. They sometimes describe the directive as fast-tracking autonomous weapon systems. They're I think folks that think that the Pentagon is like storing killer robots in the basement. But the directive, all the directive does is say that there's an additional level of scrutiny required prior to development and prior to fielding, because we want to ensure that any autonomous weapon system that's developed and deployed can be developed and deployed in a safe and responsible manner that enhances the capabilities of the joint force and is consistent with all of our obligations under the law of war.
Great. So I want to turn to the topic of test and evaluation. I think the updated directive placed more emphasis on test and evaluation as well as verification and validation. What do you think about the department's tools when it comes to T&E? Do you think the department has adequate and sophisticated test and evaluation tools where the senior reviewers in the autonomous weapons system working group would be satisfied with the assurance models that it could provide?
That's a really good question, and I think I would say the original directive did place a really high emphasis on what we'd call T&E and V&V, but the way that it described those commitments and what the sorts of models that you would need to use to demonstrate the reliability of the system, some of that language looks a little bit outdated now, and that's one of the reasons why we updated the directive. And in particular, if you look at the sections on T&E and V&V in the updated directive, you'll see that we tried to create as much of an open architecture, encourage as much of an open architecture approach to assurance as possible. In that, this is an area of rapidly changing technology where the tools are changing and the tools to test the tools can be changing. And so we didn't want to write a directive that locked in the department to a particular method of T&E and V&V that then a couple years later becomes outdated. We want the department to use best practices. In doing so, depending on where the cutting edge of technology happens to be, and that's something that our partners throughout the department are thinking about when it comes to thinking about, all right, how would a review process really work?
And do you think the T&E community in the department is doing a good job of being able to procure new tools, investing in new tools? Do you think they should be looking at industry commercial best practices or trying to develop more of those that are government-owned testing tools?
That's a really good question, and in some ways that's a little outside my lane. I would say that I have a lot of confidence in the T&E community, and that from the engagements that we've had on both on 3000.09 and on other policies, this is a community of people across multiple organizations in the Pentagon that are committed to ensuring that we can not just adopt innovation faster, but safely. So that's what T&E is really about. And something I want to point out here that I think sometimes gets lost in the conversation about safety and responsibility is that weapon systems or even non-weapon, or even AI systems or other autonomous systems that are not weapon systems that face substantial T&E hurdles where you can't validate that they work, those aren't good systems. And nobody wants its systems to work more than the Pentagon. And so strong T&E in some ways is the backbone of innovation adoption, is because it's what enables us to know that it enables us to have trust and confidence in systems and be able to actually develop and field them. And I think the community, in some cases, it might be commercially available tools that are the optimal ones. In some cases, it might be more bespoke tools, and the community is always, I think, looking at what's most appropriate given the situation.
Thank you. So turning outside 3000.09, your office obviously covers many other critical technology areas. What other DoD policies do you think are foundational to the department better adopting emerging technologies?
That's a really good question. I think the department, in the big picture, I think one of the things we've seen in this administration is a real substantial alignment from the Secretary of Defense on down in favor of speeding up innovation and innovation adoption in the department. And I think you see a through line in the documents that this administration has published. If you look at the National Defense Strategy, and the emphasis in the National Defense Strategy on innovation, on building enduring advantages. If you look at the newly published National Defense S&T Strategy that came out just recently, these all highlight the critical importance of accelerating innovation adoption given the pacing challenge that the department faces, and the pacing challenge in this case being the People's Republic of China. And the need to, across the waterfront, think about these issues. And so whether what we're talking about is directed energy, whether we're talking about hypersonics, whether we're talking about AI and autonomy, whether we're talking about different command and control sorts of technologies, there are lots of advances being made from a technical perspective. And one of the responsibilities that our office has is ensuring that policy is there to support what we need for the joint force.
Thank you. So we've seen a lot of activities on AI across the government, across the U.S. government. I think this week Congress had 2 hearings on AI.
I think at the same time.
Yeah, it was on the same day. They were both yesterday. And the White House hosted a bunch of AI company CEOs. Can you talk about in what ways the Department of Defense is engaging with the White House and Congress on AI topics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the department has been investing in AI for decades. If you look back to some of the original foundational investments that led to the field, the research field that we would now call artificial intelligence, the Defense Department was there from the outset. And so the Defense Department's been thinking about policies surrounding these issues, what responsible behavior looks like, what trust and confidence in systems looks like, for a really long time. And so the department's deeply engaged in interagency conversations, with the White House, and really supportive of the efforts that the White House is undertaking to ensure that advances in AI occur in a way that are best for the American people. And the advances in something like large language models or generative AI in some ways are they've certainly captured the popular imagination. And they're in some ways the next step, though, in what have been a variety of different advances that we've seen over the last few decades, especially over the last decade, where the department has always been engaged in those processes, and the department's working closely with the White House and the rest of the interagency to ensure that we get policies on these issues right.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to audience questions now. There's a QR code up above if anyone wants to submit more questions. So my first question is on deterrence. So deterrence is based on shared perceived norms and fear. If there is great uncertainty and misunderstanding concerning AI, can it realistically contribute to deterrence?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what you mean by AI in this context. When I think about AI, I think about a general purpose technology. I think about something that is much more akin to electricity or the combustion engine than very specific, than a particular sort of missile or like a particular widget. And so I'd reframe that a little bit so there are some applications of AI where there might be really high degrees of uncertainty, and so the contribution to deterrence might be a little bit opaque. There's some applications of AI where the application might be relatively straightforward and visible in a way that, or where the use of AI reduces uncertainty, thus contributing to deterrence. And so I think it's not clear to me that there's necessarily a general answer to that question, because the possible applications of AI are so broad and cover so many different aspects of the overall defense enterprise.
Great. This next question is probably on your second most favorite topic besides 3009. It's on AUKUS. So what is your office doing to drive a shift in culture inside the Pentagon towards a greater collaboration with our allies, for instance, your work through the AUKUS?
So if you'll recall, when I talked about the responsibilities that the Emerging Capabilities Policy Office has, that fourth pillar of our activity involves work to support emerging capabilities in the context of allies and partners. And one manifestation of that is work we've done to support the administration and the secretary on AUKUS. And I'll say AUKUS is an enormous initiative and endeavor that has broad interagency support, and even within the Pentagon, it certainly takes a village when it comes to AUKUS. And so we've been working hard to support the Secretary's senior advisor for AUKUS, Abe Denmark, and a lot of the other AUKUS stakeholders in trying to drive things forward, whether it's working on the announcement of the optimal pathway for conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines for Australia that came out in March, or the development of advanced capabilities in the context of AUKUS, which I realize we have not talked about that much publicly, but where we've certainly, I think, highlighted areas where we think that trilateral capability development is important, areas such as AI, quantum, hypersonics, et cetera.
Thank you. So in the beginning, you talked a lot about the mission of your office, which is on responsible behavior and norms. What are some of the most, which unintended consequences, I think, of scaling autonomy are you worried about the most?
Am I worried about the most? I'll be honest. So when I was on stage here last time, I've been in this job for 6 weeks. And so my response to lots of the questions was, I've been here for 6 weeks. I'm not really sure. My answer now, having been here for a year, is I've only been here for a year. I'm not really sure. Sorry. One of the things that, this is the second time I've been in government, and one of the things that has struck me both times is the serious talent that we have inside the United States government and inside the Department of Defense. And in some ways, so when it comes to what I worry about, I'm actually a little less worried on this front because I believe in our people. and because I believe in our people and in our ability to work as a team to understand the way that emerging technologies like AI and autonomy are impacting the security environment, and then what that should mean for capability development, what that should mean for development, for testing, for deployment, et cetera. The answer to the question that you're probably looking for is that the thing that I think a lot of people have worried about is unintended engagements. And when it comes to the deployment of autonomous systems, how do we ensure that those systems are deployed in a way that does not lead to unintended engagements? The answer to that, in some ways, depends on what the goal is at the end of the day. And the goal for the department is an effective joint force, and a joint force that is using force in a way that aligns with our values, with our norms, with the law of war, et cetera. And I'm very confident in our ability to do that. Is there some possibility of unintended engagements could happen with an autonomous system? Well, the T&E and V&V processes will be designed to dramatically reduce that likelihood. Unintended engagements also happen with non-autonomous weapon systems and can happen with semi-autonomous weapon systems. And so I think the challenge for the department, and I think the department is able to rise to this challenge, is how do we develop T&E and V&V that reduces the probability of unintended engagements in a way that builds trust and confidence in operators in using advanced technologies. Since we can have all the fancy widgets we want in the world, but if the actual humans who are responsible for the use of force don't trust them, then the ability of those technologies to enhance the capabilities of the joint force will be limited. And so I think there's essentially a human factors question here that is hugely important and sometimes I think underrated in how we talk about these issues.
Thank you. I want to talk about the role of industry in helping the department develop guidelines and policies. I remember when I was in the department, we were developing the ethical principles and the responsible AI strategy and implementation pathway. A bunch of companies wanted to come in and tell us about their own frameworks and guidelines. What role do you think industry has in helping the government develop these kinds of norms and policies?
I think the department's always interested in good ideas, and while there are lots of good ideas in government, I think government certainly doesn't have a monopoly on the good ideas out there, and so when industry stakeholders have policy ideas concerning norms and governance, I think that's something that the department's often eager to hear, especially when it might involve best practices and notions that maybe and there's expertise that industry is bringing to the table. And I think the department generally welcomes that. On different specific policy issues, the ability of the department to engage industry at different points in time depends on the policy, in the sensitivity of the particular policy. But I think that the department's actually really open, and especially given our understanding of the changing technology environment, increasingly open to ideas from industry, particularly those rooted in best practices for norms and responsible behavior.
I think within that, is there a specific sort of policy topic or research question that you think the department is struggling to answer that you could hear more from industry on?
I mean, I think there are lots of areas where we'd be, I think, delighted to hear more from, more from industry. That it's more, I mean, it's frankly more an acquisition and sustainment question. I think at the end of the day, they lead a lot of our industry engagement rather than, I sit in OSD policy than policy as an organization, and so the industry engagement that crosses my desk tends to be a little bit, or proposed industry engagement tends to be a little bit different. I think from where I sit, often the sorts of engagements that, and I would say this is, broadly, not just an industry question, but an academia question, think tank question, et cetera, are, and I'm probably the millionth person to say this, but on the outside, prior to starting this position, I was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and someday when they kick me out, I'll go back. And I know they will kick me out. My ability to read the great ideas and material out there, those are innovative thinking about the world is so much reduced compared to what it was when I was sitting up in Philadelphia. And one of the really important things that I think the department can get from external engagements are a lot of those innovative kinds of ideas. And that's why the department has things like the Defense Innovation Board, the Defense Policy Board, the Defense Business Board, those kinds of things. They're mechanisms the department's created to try to ensure access to those great ideas from the outside.
So before they kick you back, hopefully not anytime soon, what do you hope to accomplish?
I think over the, I don't know what time frame, I would say over the next, from the perspective of where I sit in the Emerging Capabilities Policy Office, I think it goes back to those sort of 4 missions. And if you ask me a year from now, were you successful, the way that I would judge that success is in looking across a few budget cycles. Has policy been a good stakeholder in promoting emerging capability adoption and ensuring that alignment with the National Defense Strategy, in that it follows through into the budget, that we promoted norms of responsible behavior that are consistent with department policy and help build support for those, that we've helped ensure that as we speed up the deployment of emerging capabilities, that we do that in a responsible way. We use that kind of what I like to say responsible speed approach to capability development in a way that enhances stability, and that we do so in a way that brings in allies and partners. With AUKUS, I think, is a principal example of that. And that the National Defense Strategy makes clear that to succeed in the face of the pacing challenge of the PRC, the United States needs to work more closely with its allies and partners than ever in the defense space, and that's an area of priority for the department and for my office.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me.